From the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, Constitution, the basic principles and laws of a nation, state, or social group that determine the powers and duties of the government and guarantee certain rights to the people in it. Our state constitution guarantees rights to the people. That is its purpose. This legislation seeks to define what rights people with uteruses do not have. And if we are going to take that step, to turn our Constitution toward a different purpose, to withhold rights rather than ensure, to circumscribe rights rather than guarantee, to identify weakness left open to attack rather than rights to be maintained. If we are going to redefine what a constitution is, we need to reflect carefully on the human impact. And we know what that looks like because we have already been there. Karen is one of my constituents. Now she's a grandmother living in a senior community, but in 1972, she was a mother of 2 young children and she found out she was pregnant again, even though she had an IUD. The Delcon shield was invented in 1968 before medical devices were regulated. It retailed for $4.35, was made of plastic, and 60% of the women who got pregnant while using it had miscarriages. Infection and even death were all very real risks for Karen. And it happened to many women who had this IUD, an IUD that would be taken off the market 2 years later. The fetus was also at risk for severe birth defects, very possibly growing with the Delcon shield in its arm, head, or pelvis. Her doctor said he couldn't remove the IUD because it might be embedded in the fetus, and he'd be performing an illegal abortion. She did not have the right to an abortion in Iowa at that time. So this young mother had to quickly find somewhere else she could go for help. Even though she did not have the right, she had the resources, she had the money, she had the support she needed to find a doctor, to travel to another state, to get the medical care she needed to avoid tragedy. This woman was lucky, but so many other women at that time were not. Another one of my constituents, Amanda, was pregnant with her first child in 2012, a girl, and everything was going great. Everything was normal until they got that 20-week scan. Diaphragmatic hernia, which allowed the baby's organs to go where they shouldn't be. Their daughter would be born with severely underdeveloped lungs, and there was no hope she would survive. She said to me, I would have had to carry her to term or until she died, and I would have had an emergency delivery. She would have died while suffocating. She said, before it happened to me, I never would have ever thought that this would be what I chose. But we chose the most compassionate path so she wouldn't suffer. As a parent, it was the only thing that I could give her, not to suffer. She said, it rips me up inside the idea that today I would not have that right to choose compassion. In 2012, this woman still had the right to choose an abortion after 20 weeks in Iowa. And they moved forward at 23 weeks and had an abortion. She told me. Later, we found out we were one of the cases where there wasn't an option. We found out later it was a genetic issue, so much worse than they thought. She said, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about her. We can't hold her today. This summer, she should be celebrating 9 years. So every Christmas, we donate to a child her age, and we share her story. We felt so alone, and it helps one other person to not feel alone. It's worth it to tell this story. She tells this story again and again every time a bill like this shows up in the Iowa legislature because she wants you to listen to people like her. And because she can't be here, I'm sharing her words with you. Sometimes terrible things happen, and you can't predict, you can't control. She said, I'm trying to help you understand I don't need you to make that choice for me. What this legislation seeks to inscribe in our Constitution is that Iowans, in tragic circumstances, would not be guaranteed a right to make their own medical decisions. Iowans would not have their rights protected to determine for themselves the best way forward through terrible circumstances. So many would not be ensured the dignity to make the best choices for themselves, for their families, for their future, for their lives here in Iowa. For that, they'll have to go somewhere else. As a minister and a hospital chaplain, I have seen people in life circumstances that no one could ever imagine until it happened to them. And what helped the most in the worst times of all was the right to make their own choices. Whatever your idea is about what this legislation is going to do, whatever you think the intent is when someone chooses abortion, know that this will mean there will always be Iowans in complicated situations you did not account for, situations in which you can't begin to know what you would do if you were in their shoes. There will be Iowans like these two constituents that I shared stories about, who through no fault of their own, on top of their heartbreak, facing traumatic and terrible outcomes, even when their own life is at risk, will have no right in Iowa to seek the medical care that they need. Vote no. Thank you, Mr. President.